He emptied it. Every single dollar, gone. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of my office building, engine still running, when I opened my banking app to transfer rent money. The number I saw made my stomach drop. My Chase account, the one I'd been building for 6 years, the one that held $3.2 million in savings, investments I'd liquidated 2 months ago. And the proceeds from selling my condo showed a balance of $214. I sat there for a full minute, just staring at the screen. My thumb kept refreshing like the number would change. It didn't. I called the bank. They put me on hold for 4 minutes that felt like 40. When the representative came back, her voice was careful, the kind of careful that means someone already knows this is bad. She told me a wire transfer had been processed 3 days ago. Authorized under the power of attorney on file. The name on the authorization was my husband's. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, thank you, and ended the call. Then I drove home. My husband was in the kitchen when I walked in. He was making coffee, still in his work clothes, scrolling his phone like it was any other Tuesday evening. He looked up when he heard my keys hit the counter. And something crossed his face. Not guilt, exactly. More like a man who had rehearsed this moment and was deciding which version to deliver. We need to talk, he said. We do, I agreed. I pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down. I didn't take off my coat. He sat across from me, set his phone face down, folded his hands, and then he said, with the calm of someone who had convinced himself he was completely reasonable, I moved the money. I know you're upset. But I need you to understand my mother is losing her house. My brother has nothing. This family has been struggling for years while you've been sitting on millions and doing nothing with it. I made a decision. It was the right one. I looked at him for a long moment. Where did it go? I asked. My mother's mortgage is paid off. My brother got enough to start over. There's some left. I kept it in an account I can access. It's still ours, it's just, how much is left? He hesitated. About $400,000. So he had moved $3.2 million. Paid off his mother's house, handed his brother what I could only imagine was a life-changing sum, and kept the rest in an account with his name only. And he was looking at me like he was waiting for me to understand. That money, I said slowly, was mine before we were married. It's in my name, the account is mine. You had power of attorney for medical emergencies only. We signed that document when I had surgery 2 years ago. It had a 30-day expiration clause. He blinked. Well, the bank didn't catch that. No, I said. They didn't. I stood up, buttoned my coat back, and picked up my keys. Where are you going? He asked. Out, I said. And I left him sitting at that table. I had been married for 4 years. I had known, for about 18 months, that something was wrong. Not in a dramatic way. In the quiet way that a smart woman knows when the ground under her feet has started to shift. The way you start noticing things, the separate phone, the calls taken outside, the way his family talked about my money like it was a shared resource they hadn't been given access to yet. His mother once told me, at Thanksgiving, that I was lucky to have married into such a loving family. She said it while looking at my watch. I had started preparing 8 months ago. Not because I knew specifically what he would do, but because I understood what kind of man I had married, finally, and I stopped pretending otherwise. I had quietly removed him as an authorized user on every account except one. That one I left open on purpose, with just enough in it to look like I hadn't noticed anything. I had moved the real money, the $3.2 million, into that Chase account under the assumption that it would be the last account he'd expect me to have protected because it was the one he had POA access to. What I had not told him was that I had consulted an attorney 7 months prior who confirmed that the POA document we signed post-surgery had a 30-day expiration written into paragraph 4. He had never read paragraph 4. He had just assumed it was permanent. I had also, quietly and without announcement, spent 6 months documenting everything. Every conversation where his family mentioned my assets. 3 recorded calls where his brother asked him directly when he was going to handle the money situation. A text from his mother that read, in plain language, She doesn't even spend it. She won't miss what she doesn't know about. I had a meeting scheduled for 8 a.m. the following morning. I had scheduled it 2 weeks prior, before any of this happened, because I had known it was coming. I just hadn't known the exact date. That night, I stayed at my friend's apartment. I didn't sleep much. I sat at her kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of tea, and I went through every document one more time. My attorney had already reviewed everything. The filing was ready. I just needed to give the signal. I sent one email at 11:47 p.m. 2 words, file it. By 7 a.m., the emergency motion had been submitted. By 8:15 a.m., I was sitting across from a fraud investigator at the bank's legal compliance office. I brought a folder. Inside, the original POA document with the expiration clause highlighted, a timeline of the transfers, the recorded calls, the text messages, and a letter from my attorney outlining the grounds for wire fraud and unauthorized use of financial power of attorney. The investigator read through it without a word. Then she looked up. "You've been building this for a while," she said. "I have," I said. "The transfer to the external account, the one your husband retained, we can flag that for immediate freeze pending investigation. The funds sent to third parties are more complicated." "I understand," I said. "My attorney is filing a civil claim against the recipients as well. But I wanted to start here." She nodded slowly. "We'll need to escalate this to our fraud division. Your accounts will be flagged and protected as of this morning." "Thank you," I said. I stood. I shook her hand, and I walked out into the morning air feeling something I hadn't felt in months. My husband called 17 times between 9 a.m. and noon. I let every call go to voicemail. At 12:08, he sent a text. "The bank called me. What did you do? Call me back right now." I didn't respond. At 2 p.m., my attorney called to confirm that the freeze had been processed. The $400,000 my husband had retained in his private account was now locked pending investigation. Additionally, the motion I'd filed in court that morning had been granted. An emergency asset freeze covering all jointly accessible accounts and a temporary restraining order preventing him from accessing, moving, or disposing of any marital assets while the investigation was ongoing. He found out about the restraining order when he tried to access our joint credit card at a restaurant. It was declined. He came to my friend's apartment that evening. I know because she called to tell me. I wasn't there. I had checked into a hotel downtown under a different card, one that was mine alone and had never been shared, connected to an email address he didn't know existed. I had learned, somewhere in those 8 months of preparation, that when you're dealing with someone who has already proven they will take what isn't theirs, you stop leaving doors unlocked. His mother called me the next morning. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Because I wanted to hear what she would say. "Sweetheart," she started, and that word alone told me everything. Nobody calls you sweetheart when they respect you. I know you're upset. But you have to understand, my son loves you. He made a mistake in judgment, but his heart was in the right place. That money for the mortgage, we were so desperate. We didn't think you'd react like this." "Like what?" I asked. A pause. "Like this was some kind of crime." "It is a crime," I said. "Wire fraud is a federal offense. Misuse of power of attorney is a criminal matter in this state. Your son moved $3.2 million out of my personal account without my knowledge or consent using a legal document that had expired 30 days prior. That is not a judgment call. That is a felony." Silence. "I've already spoken to my attorney," I continued. "The funds transferred to your mortgage have been flagged as proceeds of fraud. A civil recovery claim has been filed. Your attorney will receive documentation within the week." She hung up. She didn't say goodbye. His brother called an hour later. His tone was different, less soft, more threatening. He told me I was being vindictive. He told me that people like me, meaning women like me, meaning women with money, always thought they could ruin men who were just trying to survive. He told me I would regret this. I recorded that call too. My attorney was pleased when I forwarded it. 3 weeks after the initial freeze, my husband's attorney reached out with a settlement proposal. He wanted to negotiate. He wanted to return the $400,000 in the locked account in exchange for me dropping the civil and criminal complaints. He framed it as the reasonable solution. I declined. Not out of spite. Out of principle. Because $400,000 was not $3.2 million. And because accepting a partial return in exchange for silence was exactly what someone with no other options would do. I was not that person. What I did instead was send a counteroffer through my attorney. Full restitution of all funds, including those transferred to third parties. A signed acknowledgement of wrongdoing. And a formal divorce filing in which I would be seeking sole ownership of 3 jointly held assets, none of which he had contributed to financially, all of which he had put his name on during the marriage. His attorney called my attorney. The conversation, as I was told, was tense. 2 days later, my husband called me from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "You're really going to do this," he said. He wasn't asking. It was something between disbelief and defeat. "I already did it," I said. "Weeks ago. I thought you loved me." I let that sit for a moment. I thought I did too. And then I watched you steal from me and explain it like you'd done me a favor. "It was for my family." "I was your family," I said. "And you decided I didn't count." He didn't have anything to say to that. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line. "The settlement window closes Friday," I said. "My attorney will be in contact." And I hung up. The civil case moved faster than I expected. The funds transferred to his brother were partially recoverable. He had already spent a portion, but enough remained that a judgment could be enforced. His mother's mortgage was more complicated. Real property transactions take longer to unwind. But my attorney was patient and thorough. The bank's fraud division completed their preliminary investigation in 6 weeks. The finding was exactly what I had documented. The POA used to authorize the wire transfer had been expired at the time of the transaction. The transfer had been processed in error. The bank, now facing its own liability exposure, became considerably more cooperative. The divorce proceedings were filed on a Wednesday. He was served at his mother's house, where he had been staying since I'd effectively shut down access to every shared resource we had. His attorney filed a response within the week, contesting several of the asset claims. They were still contesting. My documentation was better. It was a Saturday morning, about 2 months after that night in the parking garage, when I let myself feel something other than strategy. I was sitting in the window of a coffee shop near my new apartment, a short-term furnished rental in a neighborhood I had always liked, but he had called too quiet. I had a lease signed on a permanent place starting in 30 days. I had a job I was good at, savings that were slowly being recovered, and a clarity I hadn't had in years. My phone buzzed. A message from a colleague who had heard, through the professional network we shared, some version of what had happened. She didn't know the details, but she wrote, "I heard you're going through something hard. You seem like someone who handles hard things well." I looked out the window for a while before I typed back. Because it was true, and I was still getting used to knowing it. I had always been the one who managed things quietly. Who handled the taxes, read the fine print, kept the documentation, understood the contracts. He had always treated that as a personality quirk, something between charming and excessive. He never understood that the woman who reads paragraph 4 is exactly the kind of woman you do not want to steal from. What he had mistaken for passivity was patience. What he called invisible, I called watching. I had been paying attention for years. To the way money moved in his family, to the casual assumptions they made about what was ours, to the slow and steady way a man can convince himself that his needs are more legitimate than his wife's rights. He thought I would cry. He thought I would negotiate from emotion, from the desire to preserve the marriage, from the fear of being alone. He had never really known me. I finished my coffee. I opened my laptop. I had a meeting in an hour with a financial advisor who was helping me restructure what remained of my portfolio. I had a call after that with my attorney. And that evening, I was going to a dinner with 3 women from my professional network. Women who built things, women who protected what they built, women who understood that a strong foundation doesn't happen by accident. I was 31 years old. I had lost 4 years of my life to a marriage I thought was real and a man I thought was honest. I had also, in those 4 years, quietly built the kind of case that defense attorneys dread. I had the records. I had the timeline. I had the receipts, literal ones, time-stamped and organized in folders my attorney had called the most organized documentation I have seen in 20 years of practice. He wanted me to be the woman who stayed quiet, who absorbed the loss, kept the peace, and moved on. Instead, I became the woman who made sure every single person involved understood that there are consequences. Not just for what you take, but for believing you could take it in the first place. The final settlement came on a Thursday afternoon. My attorney called me while I was walking between meetings. Full restitution of all recoverable funds. A signed acknowledgement. Terms of the divorce finalized in my favor on every contested asset. His brother's debt to me would be repaid over a structured payment schedule, enforceable by court order. His mother's situation was resolved through a separate negotiation. I will not detail here, except to say that the property is no longer titled the way it was. My attorney said, "This is a very good outcome." "I know," I said. "I designed it to be." That evening, I walked into a room of about 200 people. A professional organization I joined years ago was holding their annual awards dinner. I had been nominated for something I'd honestly forgotten about in the chaos of the past 2 months. I almost hadn't come. But I sat at my table, in a dress I bought with my own money, among colleagues who knew my work and not my marriage, and when they called my name I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I didn't give a long speech. I said thank you to the people who deserved it. I said that the past year had taught me something I should have known earlier. That the most dangerous thing a woman can do, in the eyes of people who want to diminish her, is to be prepared. To have the records. To know the law. To understand that silence is not the same as surrender. I said that I had been underestimated by people who were very close to me, and that I hoped they had learned something from the experience. The room laughed. Some of them didn't know they were laughing at a true story. Afterward, a woman I barely knew came up to me. She looked like she was holding something heavy behind her eyes. She said, very quietly, "Did that happen to you? What you described?" "Yes," I said. "How did you know what to do?" I thought about it for a moment. About the 8 months of quiet preparation. About the attorney and the recorded calls and paragraph 4. About all the nights I sat in my car in parking lots, on the phone with people I trusted, building something piece by piece while pretending everything at home was fine. I stopped waiting for it to get better, I said. And I started getting ready. She nodded like that meant something to her. I hoped it did. I walked out of that dinner hall alone, into the cold night air, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and just breathed. The city was loud and lit up and completely indifferent to everything that had happened to me in the past 2 months. I found that enormously comforting. My phone buzzed one more time. A notification from my banking app. A partial restitution deposit had cleared. The number on the screen was not $3.2 million. Not yet, but it was significant. And it was mine. I put my phone in my pocket and started walking. They had wanted me to be invisible. They had spent 4 years treating me like a resource and not a person. They had made the specific mistake of believing that a woman who stays calm is a woman who will stay quiet. I was calm. I was also extraordinarily well documented. And I was just getting started.